Hello everyone. I am Dr. Prins Ralston, Principal at Nous Group, and welcome to CEDA's Does Disruption Drive Innovation? Today we will be discussing how the COVID-19 crisis is providing an opportunity to change and innovate across all our sectors, workplaces, from healthcare delivery to manufacturing and supply chains. Today's event is being live streamed because, like many organisations, CEDA has suspended attendance at public events. However, at this time of significant economic uncertainty, CEDA remains true to its purpose of providing platforms to inform and promote debate of critical issues, and that is why this event is being made available as a live stream. Over the coming months, CEDA will be making a range of events across key issues available in digital formats to ensure CEDA members and the community more broadly can access discussions on the most important issues impacting Australia's economic and social development. As details of these events are confirmed, they will be made available on the CEDA website, ceda.com.au, and I encourage you to check back for these details. CEDA will also be producing regular podcasts and video interviews with leading experts and policymakers to ensure you can remain up to date with quality information on key issues impacting the economy and more broadly, and in key sectors such as health and resources. These are also made available through the CEDA website. Today, like at CEDA events, you will still be able to interact with the speakers through our question and answer portal, which is available via the link below the video on your screen. Or you can enter the details by going to ceda.pigeonhole.at and using the passcode disruption. You can also join the conversation on Twitter by using today's hashtag, which is #CrisisInnovation, and tagging CEDA at CEDA_news. CEDA acknowledges that today and every day we are on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander lands and are committed to recognition and reconciliation. We respect elders and we support their stated aspirations. I would like to thank and acknowledge the CSIRO for their sponsorship of today's event on behalf of CEDA. Now, on to our topic for today, does disruption drive innovation? The seed of innovation can be a new idea, a new design, a reimagined product or process. But of course, unless it's applied and scaled, it still just remains an idea. During this pandemic disruption, a disruption the likes that we have not seen in our lifetime, organisations have needed to respond, adapt, and are evolving to meet the ever-changing needs of the people they serve both internally and externally. The saying goes that necessity is the mother of invention. And today we have on our panel two leaders whose organisations are at the forefront of leading innovation in order for humanity to overcome a crisis, and as I said, the likes of which we've never seen before. I would like to now extend a warm welcome to those online as well as our speakers to lead this important discussion. Our speakers today are Professor Peter Hoy, AC, President and Vice Chancellor, the University of Queensland. And joining us is Dr. Cathy Foley, AO, Chief Scientist of the CSIRO. I'd like to now hand over to our first speaker. Please welcome to the CEDA stage, Professor Peter Hoy, AC, for his opening address. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you so much, Prins, and welcome to all of you. And thank you for taking the time to listening to us. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Very briefly, the answer to the question we've been posed, whether disruption drives innovation, I think it's clear to all of us that that is the case. The fact that we're not sitting around having lunch now, but doing this online is one such example. I do believe that for us at this point in time, the disruption has been an accelerant of what we've already been doing to a certain extent for some time. So let me try to establish this. My institution is an institution which has an annual income from international students of some $700 million per annum. And when you suddenly see the borders closed and we have lockdown, neither the international students nor the domestic students can come and attend your offering. So you need to pivot very fast. And in our case, we managed to pivot 92% of our 1,500 courses that we teach to an online format in a period of less than 2 weeks. Now, if I had asked my staff to do that under normal circumstances, that would have taken perhaps 3 years. But how could we do that? Because we already had a base. We had already been active in the so-called MOOCs platforms, where we had 3 million international learners sign up to our platform. So the reason why we could disrupt ourselves quickly was that we had enough knowledge in our base DNA to be able to do so. So that's just one example of what we've done. And I think we will never shrink back to what we were before. We will now use those new skills, which we now have in quantity, to develop some new business models for teaching overseas students, because we actually think that not only for pandemic reasons, but perhaps also for geopolitical reasons, the way that we source students and the way they seek us out will have changed a lot. Let me try to give you another example of disruption, which is very relevant to what we're talking about. In 2015, Bill Gates gave a talk, and it was a TED talk, and he predicted that the biggest challenge that humanity would meet in the short term was not a nuclear war, but a global pandemic. For that reason, people got together in 2017 and created an international body with quite a lot of money from the Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Foundation, the German and Norwegian and UK governments. And it was called the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation. UQ has been in vaccine research for a long, long time. You know, we have invented through Ian Fraser the Gardasil vaccine and brought that to the Australian people in partnership with CSL. So we decided to go for one of those capacity building grants that CEPI put out in case we should have an epidemic. The money started flowing in 2019, some $18 million, and we were just building our capability to respond to a pandemic. Little did we know that on the 23rd of January last year, the call came and said, you got to move fast now, drop everything you do, we need a vaccine very quickly. And the disruption that we're now seeing is that we have in record time being able to go into clinical trials in humans, which started this Monday on the 13th of July. In a period of less than half a year, we come from do a vaccine to going into human trials. However, the disruptive nature of this vaccine means we can't do the traditional phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials, regulatory approvals, and then try to find a global manufacturer who can produce at scale, which will mean several 100 million doses of a vaccine. So what we had to do was to convince people to invest in us and partner with us to disrupt this linear pipeline. And what we have now is that we have actually a partnership with CEPI and CSL, where we're starting to produce in parallel with the clinical trials. In that sense, we can cut at least 6 months off the delivery time for a vaccine, should it be successful. And a world that is in absolute lockdown because of a vaccine, 6 months of accelerated development of the vaccine is incredibly powerful socially and economically. So that's just finally, I just wanted to talk about how we're never going to go back to running the organisation like we are now. I've been a Vice-Chancellor for 13 years, and each year I've got up early, 4 o'clock in the morning, to go on a plane to Canberra to meet with all my colleagues at Universities Australia's board meetings, and then come home late at night. Now we've had to do it via Zoom, and I would hope, even though I'm retiring, that my colleagues have found that it's much better to do it on Zoom and perhaps meet once a year, perhaps for a whole weekend, to do some real good strategic discussions. We found at our work that we can easily have a meeting of 400 people in a function where beforehand we said, where can we have them? So I think I don't have a lot of more time to talk, but again, how we organize ourselves, how we allow ourselves to source staff from far away to contribute to our enterprise is something that we certainly will take advantage of. Finally, a personal lived example. I'm Danish, born in 1957. And of course, in 1973, we had the oil crisis. And Denmark had to make a choice about how it would secure future energy supplies. Would we go nuclear like Sweden did, or would we try to go renewable? And out of that disruption came the birth of the Danish windmill industry. And as many people know, it was for a long time the world's foremost windmill producers, multi-billion-dollar industry. It was the disruption that forced us to think that way. And in that vein, tomorrow, I'm going to open a 64 megawatt solar farm, and it's UQ solar farm. And that will allow us to now get into the hydrogen game. But again, what has disrupted us there is exceedingly high energy prices that we can offset fully with our investments. So I do think that disruption will drive innovation, and I'm hoping very much to be on a journey with you to do that. In order to be able to continually disrupt, we do, however, have to make sure that our nation does invest appropriately in the ideas to be able to react to the opportunities that future crises will impose upon us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. That was excellent, and certainly gave us a good context in terms of the disruption and where we're looking for innovation. We'll come back to examining how we invest in those ideas. Now, I'd like to hand over to our second speaker. Please welcome to the CEDA stage Dr. Cathy Foley for her opening address. Cathy.
Thanks, Prins. It's really great to be here. And I'd like to actually use this to build on what Peter presented, because I want to go a little bit further. And I think we can all agree that there is a renewed focus on innovation during this time of the pandemic crisis. But innovation, if you take it as a narrow definition, is not necessarily going to get us where we need to go to, because innovation isn't just invention, it involves much more. I think innovation, you could say, is when you take that invention and turn it into impact, and that's what we're seeing in real time happening now, particularly with the aim of trying to get a vaccine in place. To create impact, though, you need to commercialise, and to commercialise, you need to have strong networks of collaborators from industry and research. And as well as that, you need to have what I call the wraparound of business models, the social license to do the work, the user interface so that we've got things that people want, the ability to undertake pre-commercial scale-up, which you're seeing now with the COVID vaccine at UQ, as well as engineered outcomes and strong partnerships and a supply chain that is created to let this all come together. And unfortunately, Australia doesn't have a strong track record in achieving all this. We have brilliant research, but you're probably sick of hearing that we rank poorly in the OECD ranking for industry research collaboration. In fact, we're still ranked at the bottom. And you might have seen last year there was a Harvard report that said that Australia's export complexity was lower than Uganda, which is really not where we want to be. I think where we get it wrong is that we're not succeeding in the universal use of collaboration to augment our invention from our university or researchers with the different parts of the sector and applying their role to progress and invention through to commercial success. So to capitalise on this appetite for change and innovation, I think we're in a good place now where we need to get the different parts of the innovation ecosystem working together. I'm going to give a couple of examples of different models of how this might work. So, for example, last year you might have heard about B2 Foods, an Australian plant-based meat replacement startup company. It started with partnership between CSIRO and Hungry Jack's founder, Jack Cohen. And what happened was researchers in CSIRO had a concept. They went through the ON Accelerator program, which had been funded by the NISA program from a few years ago. They secured funding from the CSIRO innovation fund called Main Sequence Ventures, and then used scale-up facilities we have for food scale-up in Werribee. They found a CEO to run the company and use the researchers just as advisors. And today we now have a $20 million manufacturing facility being built at Albury-Wodonga, and we're taking this new food product, which vegans love, to the world. So you can see here that's one example where science and technology accelerator programs like this, and also University of Queensland has a fabulous one called iLab Accelerator. And we're using this with venture capital funds to invest in science and technology translation. Another model is one we did with Medical Developments International, MDI, and that's an Australian company that creates a pain relief drug called Penthrox. You might have seen it delivered as a green whistle. And to help de-risk their need to expand to address the world market, CSIRO actually invested in a new manufacturing process, which was developed in collaboration with Melbourne University and Monash University, as well as CSIRO, that allowed MDI to expand internationally. So Penthrox is now sold in 26 European countries, as well as UAE, Taiwan, and Mexico. And in a few years, that company grew from being just a local manufacturer worth about $4 million to being valued way over $300 million and delivering internationally. And then I guess looking at working with major international multinational companies, a good example is CSIRO and the Boeing collaboration, which has been going for nearly 30 years. And in one example, we produced an inherently conductive polymer in collaboration with them, and that can be used in a range of applications for sensors and actuators for electronic appliances. And as a result, and through understanding their supply chain needs, we were able to get a local Australian spin-up from CSIRO from some years ago called Boron Molecular. They're based in Melbourne, to produce this and become part of Boeing's supply chain. And now it's a fully integrated company, and it's continuing to diversify and expand. And I might just point as a side note, from a perspective to understand the investment needed from industry, Boeing spends about $3.2 billion US a year on their research and development. During the 2017-2018 financial year, R&D expenditure by the whole of the Australian business sector was around about just 1.7 billion, and that's actually fell from previous years. So Australia is well below the OECD average of business expenditure on research and development. We have another live example here, which you heard from Professor Peter Hoy about the development of the COVID-19 vaccine. And I think that I just want to also add in the role that CSIRO played with that, with our CSIRO's biologics production facility in Melbourne, that developed the processes to scale up the UQ vaccine, produce and purify that so that it's able to be delivered to their phase 2 trials. And as you heard about their plans to commercialise with CSL. And the announcement of the first trials this week are indeed very exciting. So these are Australian-grown innovations, and they've brought commercial success thanks to strong collaboration. If the collaboration didn't happen, it wouldn't happen. So this is the type of thing we need to see more of in Australia to help innovate and grow out of this crisis. But there's also another thing we need to do, and that is that innovation requires us to make bets. And Peter explained that with the preparation for the COVID or in anticipation of a pandemic. And we need to be able to look into the future and see around corners and anticipate challenges. The role of science in national preparedness has risen to the fore in the last little while and will continue to remain absolutely crucial as we apply to address these future challenges, some of which we don't even know what they are yet. And the trick is for us to make the investments early and to see the future clearly enough so we can put our capability into the right place So that's not just for the now, but it's for 3 to 5 years into the future. The reason why we had the capability to play that large role in CSIRO for the COVID-19 vaccine development was because we foresaw the pandemic 4 years ago. We have a roadmap, we prepared for it, and you've seen the consequences of that. We also foresaw the need for agile manufacturing and invested in that, and that gave us advanced biologics manufacturing facility, which I've mentioned, as well as the capability to scale up a small pilot facility in Geelong for dealing with the shortage of materials to produce critical products such as face masks. And now we need to decide where is the next threat likely to come from, what are the opportunities, and where do we need to invest? CSIRO has been focusing on these challenges, and we're looking at what we need to do and what we're facing as a nation, from whether it's agriculture and digital disruption through to climate change and infectious diseases and cybersecurity. These areas represent major scientific research programs, and they will require large-scale collaboration if we're going to see this have the impact we desire. So for large-scale collaboration to be successful, each organisation has to play their part. We need to have clear roles, and we need to focus on where the impact is. Research doesn't end at the publishing of a paper. I think we're now realising research ends when we've created the change to the world. And we take that seriously at CSIRO because that's our purpose. To check in if we do have impact, we just recently did an independent study. In 2018, we were able to identify that CSIRO's research portfolio, for every $1 we spend, there's a $6 multiplier impact to the nation. So making this ecosystem work is our biggest challenge for Australia, I think, and we need to look at how we can innovate and grow our economy out of this crisis that's been created by the pandemic. We know we have great research capability and potential to lead in future industries like advanced manufacturing. We're looking at hydrogen as a new energy source, space and quantum technologies. We can also lead in new industries that are created by the opportunities of dealing with climate change, healthcare, and even agriculture. But to do this, we need to create the impact of a better network and better ways to collaborate our commercial outcomes. And we need all parts of the research sector to understand their role, to link together, and to see how we can move development across that valley of death to use and to impact. So we also need to use our science to see around corners and decide where do we need to invest to secure our future, which is unfortunately going to be more pandemics, more disruption. So Australia, we need to decide where we want to place our best bets. And I think we need to shift from our business as usual work, trying to do everything ourselves, to being one where we work together, have strong networks and strong collaborations to deal with this. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Cathy. That was a really insightful exploration of certainly some of the bets that we've made. And I guess Peter and Cathy, where I'd like to take us is, what are those bets that we should be making, given the insights that you've just articulated, Cathy, and Peter, that you've undoubtedly seen in terms of the interactions that you've had with your colleagues? Where are those bets that we need to be making, given the disruptions that are likely to come through? We need to be making those bets, I understand, in terms of the high value markets and the capabilities and where science and technology needs to drive the innovations. Can we explore, Peter, with you first, where might those bets be placed? Peter, I think you're on mute at the moment.
Sorry about that. The first bet we have to place is to understand that without a strong R&D technology base, we will not be able to continue to have a prosperous and coherent society. And one of the things that the disruption has done to us now is that it's actually going to disrupt the majority of at least Australian research innovation, because that really is funded to a very large extent by the revenues we get from international students. So as a nation, we have to take stock and say, we need to have a fundamental capability to play at the edge. But then the next thing we have to do is the mindset that Cathy is talking about, and that is to have a much more connected innovation system. And it's not only about research providers such as CSIRO or universities looking out over the fence. It is equally for businesses to look in over our fence. Because when we look out, we have to guess what people need. People in individual businesses, they know what they need and can therefore pick out what of the many capabilities they see inside a CSIRO or a university that they should tap into. So I think that's a really important thing. I do think one of the big bets that Australia has to make is to figure out how can you drive a totally new economy that will be fueled by unbelievably amounts of reasonably cheap energy. There is no such thing as a high technology industry or low technology industry. There are industries who decide to stay in the past, and there are industries who decide to go into the future. And for example, agriculture, many people think, oh, that's an old industry. It's an incredibly sophisticated industry. And I can imagine that one of the bets we really have to put on this is to say that if we have enough energy, we can grow crops in a totally different way, and we can even afford to get the water that we need to do that. So that would just be one bet. But the general bet is base capability, strong people, connectivity, and then there are some sectors we should go for. I just put one on the table, and that is an ag-tech-driven future, which is fueled by a cheap access to energy.
So, Peter, just summarising that, so you've certainly identified a bet in terms of energy and ensuring, and you were just going out to the solar farm there, you were indicating. So there's a cheap bet in terms of making sure that energy costs are driven down. You indicated both agriculture and agriculture there, and then looking at, I guess, all of this underpinned by ensuring that there's investment from various sectors, both business as well as governments and so forth, in research and development. Cathy, bringing you in here in terms of the cost, I guess, of ensuring that the appropriate research and development investment goes in. We're currently sitting at, I think in 2017-18, about 1.79% of GDP, as versus Sweden and Germany and so forth, putting something like 3 to 4% of their GDP into research and development. Are we investing enough, both from that business and the government sector, in order to ensure that science is driving where we need to go?
I think what we're seeing at the moment is government responding when there's a value proposition for them to invest in science and technology. And as Peter said, we do have to have that core, and I think Australia clearly has that core. We've got 8 universities in the top 100 in the world, which is for a country which is of the size of a medium-sized country, that's doing very well. So we've got excellent research. What I think we need to do as a research sector is that we need to identify what are the major challenges we have, and Australia's got plenty of them, from whether it's a Great Barrier Reef, Murray-Darling Basin, whether it's our health, trying to, not only have we got the pandemic, but we have chronic illness of 50% of the population, and we spend the last 11 years of our lives being sick before we die, even though we have a long lifespan. We've got these great challenges, such as you mentioned already, sustainable and energy resources. We need to think about our security in the region, not just from a geopolitical security, but also for cybersecurity and biosecurity. We have to make sure that we have an industry base that is globally competitive and is able to take that research and development into something that really does allow the growth of jobs and the growth of the economy, so that we are fit for the future. We want to have a resilient and valuable environment, and that's something that's really important for us, not only because of we live in a beautiful country, we want to sustain that, but it's actually something which is important for our health and well-being. And of course, food security and quality is absolutely critical, and I mentioned health and well-being. And to deliver on any of those, you actually need a whole lot of industry supply chains, which I talked about before. And for us to have the research investment that is needed, we need, as a research sector, to show the value proposition there and link in with the market that will drive that, and government will respond. I think as a research sector, I'm not sure that we've actually shown and demonstrated how well we can link together so that we are there for the government to invest in us and being part of their solution. I think we're beginning to see that. We've seen various state governments showing that research and development is their part of their recovery program, and they're leaning on, for example, yesterday, New South Wales government announced CSIRO being part of their platform of creating a new city out in Western Sydney with their Aerotropolis. And knowing that the state government in this case is investing big time into CSIRO is for us hugely exciting, because it shows that we're relevant. And we then have to make sure that we reach out, because we're only a small section of but a hopefully important section of the research sector. And we need to then use that connection and reach out to create those networks I was talking about before. And then finally, we're seeing federal government already announcing a whole range of steps that we will see, I think, in time, as a research sector is pulling itself together, is showing how we can be playing a role where each part does their bit. And I think you'll start seeing is innovation, and therefore the research sector being invested in, because we're part of the solution for a healthy, wealthy, wise Australia.
Thank you, Cathy. Just while I've got you, got a question for you from one of our viewers here. Question was related to what you were just talking about in terms of the collaboration for commercialization. Some great examples have been given, but how do you get all industries better linked into the academia and CSIRO?
Yeah. So one of it is we have to reach out and talk to them and create what I call industry outreach. And we're beginning to see a lot of that. I think since the NISA program in 2016, I think it was, we've seen a huge uplift in innovation in Australia. And I think the ON program is a good example where researchers, both in CSIRO and universities, are really beginning to see the value of their research beyond just publishing the paper and seeing how it fits into the market. That's the first thing. The second is we're beginning to see collaboration hubs, industry outreach with events and things where we're just getting people to meet. In fact, one of the things that's been quite a surprising outcome, as Peter mentioned before with the COVID situation, is that you no longer have to get in a plane and travel somewhere to actually meet and create relationships. It's been extraordinary to see how well we've been able to adapt to learning to meet people, find out their needs by just engaging via a video link. And this is something which, especially in a country like Australia, we've got huge distances between our major cities and centres. It means that I think we're getting a higher level of, first of all, engagement and knowledge and relationship, but also efficiency as well. I don't know about you, but as Peter mentioned, I'm quite enjoying not getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and flying around the countryside. But also, as a consequence, my productivity is being through the roof. And it's because I'm actually using that time in a much more productive way. So I think we're on a turning point. We've got work to do. I'm not saying we're there yet, but I'm pretty excited by it because I'm beginning to see those links happening. And it's things like events like today, which we've got to do more of so that we know where is the front door to innovation, where is the front door for companies to come in and find out where they can get support and make the most of the various government programs that are there. There's lots of them to show, how to create that glue between researchers and industry. And I hope that, events like this will encourage industry partners to make those contacts and see how we can support them.
Thank you, Cathy. Just picking up on one of your points there in terms of question for Mary, to you, Peter, the intense focus on the digital innovation in this current disruption just detracts from our traditional areas of innovation in tangible products. How do we accelerate this to rebuild Aussie manufacturing?
So I think the first thing is that we have to change what drives people. So at my university, which is certainly the most successful university in commercializing our research, we have created new positions which are called external engagement. So we are now saying to people that the game is not to communicate with your academic peers only. We will recognize you reaching out. So that absolutely, that culture change has to happen. A second thing that has to happen is that we got to introduce into all our learning, and that has to happen at high school and through universities, the love of innovating and doing things yourself. And we're seeing that happening in high schools. And we run programs for students where they can pitch ideas, and through escalating things, they can get $20,000 to run the company. And we had one example of somebody who raised $4.5 million one year after getting $20,000. So it's lots of things that have to happen. But the other thing that I think is happening is that the traditional ways of getting your capital to grow, stick it away in a bank and hope for 7% interest rate, that's not happening, and it won't happen for a long time. Invest in traditional companies, you're probably not going to get the growth you would hope for. Put it into a lot of real estate, might not happen. So I think there will be a lot of capital which people are increasingly willing to put at risk in innovation. Because if you run a balanced scorecard over these things, you'll find that the returns there are probably superior to anything else you can get. So there have to be some preconditions in place, and then there have to be some attitude changes. And that is that innovation actually works. And if Australia wants to not be at the mercy of all the supply chains that we no longer have in this country, we should do it not only for ourselves, but also for our country.
Thank you, Peter. Cathy, from your perspective, being one of the leading experts in the country around manufacturing and given the focus that is coming into manufacturing, and particularly advanced manufacturing and robotics from various governments, where do you see the challenges there in terms of bringing together both the research and the business in Australia to, as Peter's just indicated, really rebuild those supply chains?
Yeah, this is actually, I think, a really exciting time for manufacturing in Australia. It has been actually on a gentle growth for some time. It's been a small growth, but it's still been growing. And what we're seeing is a number of different incentives that are, or initiatives that are happening to, I guess, look at where Australia's best when it comes to manufacturing. So the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre did some really important work looking at where is Australia going to have its best bets in manufacturing, and identified that we're at its best where we've got the design and also the integration, and then you get the actual manufacturing of components done wherever it makes sense. So that's one thing which has been very exciting, very robust work that they've done. The other is that the government's initiative in looking at trying to grow our geopolitical security by investing in defence. It really has been set up in a way to really grow manufacturing. So what you're seeing is a huge investment, as we're all seeing, in frigates and submarines and other things like that, land force systems. And with that comes the expectation for when the contracts are struck with the prime industry companies, defence industry companies, a requirement for them to build the Australian supply chain. And that's been terribly important because it means it's lifting our companies, which most of our companies in Australia are small to medium enterprises. They're about 97% of our companies are small to medium enterprises. And of those, 70% of them are less than 20 people. So that means we have lots of S's, not many M's. And so part of the manufacturing area is to help grow those S's into medium-sized companies that are sophisticated enough to be part of the supply chain. And we're seeing that defence initiative have, it's always dual use. So we're being seen civilian use as well as defence use and growth of manufacturing there. And then I guess the other is coming out of the research sector is whole new concepts. And we've heard about hydrogen as a new opportunity. Well, to make that, you've got to have a whole lot of manufactured parts and the whole flow on that goes with that. But also things which are still futuristic is quantum industries. So that's a whole new area. Australia's invested in quantum research for since 2000 and before that. We've got world-leading work. In fact, the University of Queensland has the Equus Centre of Excellence there, which they're doing marvellous things there. And we've got around the country in every state and major research that is getting to a very mature stage. We're seeing startup companies happening. We did as a gathering, all the research sector getting together, and CSIRO assisted with creating a roadmap for quantum industries, and found that in the next 20 years, we're going to be seeing a multi-billion-dollar industry that's going to employ 16,000 people if we do the right things now. And what we're seeing, I think, is a pretty new approach where a whole new opportunity comes together. We start engaging with industries such as Rigetti, with state, federal government and researchers coming together to look at how to take a new concept through to creating a whole new industry, which is a manufacturing, high-tech industry, and putting the things together in place so that we can deliver on that. That's something which I don't think we've done so much of in the past. And I'm very hopeful that, rebuilding manufacturing in Australia will lead to different sorts of manufacturing than we've had in the past, things where there's a lot more value add, and also bringing on that whole opportunity of digital capabilities that will allow us to be competitive even though we're a high-cost country.
Thank you, Cathy. Peter, your views on this, because I guess want to come back to the vaccine production and what some of the options may be there for government, but just from a manufacturing point of view, how are those connections for you and your university going in terms of making those connections in order to as Cathy's just described, really build that supply chain for Australia?
So let me try to exemplify it with a real life example. So we had a guy who did a PhD in hypersonics research, and he got this idea that maybe you can develop so-called nano patches, which will allow you to do needle-free vaccination. So he had to start a company through UQ, and our first fundraising was only $8.5 million or thereabouts. All the money came out of Boston. Now, this needle-free vaccination is proving very prospective. So subsequently, when another $25 million were to be raised, it was all raised here in Australia. So I think the positive is that people are starting to redirect the capital towards innovation. And what we just announced is that Merck, who of course are the guys who globally have distributed the Gardasil vaccine for $20 billion sales, has just invested $18 million in this nano patch company called Vaxis. And they are now located here in Brisbane. And a German high-grade biomedical manufacturer, Haro Höfliger, is now also contracted to produce in Brisbane hundreds of millions of these nanopatches. And why does that link into a vaccine? It is because if you can get your vaccine onto a nanopatch, you break the cold chain. And therefore distribution to parts of the world which do not have electricity or refrigeration actually becomes important in fighting global pandemics. So I think this whole interface between advanced manufacturing and biomedical devices is an incredible opportunity for Australia, because we are doing very well in those base disciplines. So I hope that exemplified what is happening, and we just got to pump those tires up even further, because then it will get traction. We know that there's a big company that delivers I think the world's largest manufacturer of bionic parts, called Stryker, which has announced that it will set up in Brisbane as well, because people need the underpinning expertise in R&D. And in a sense, sadly, they can see that there's not enough industry demand for it from Australian companies. Therefore, it's attractive for them to come and set up here. So let's hope that Australian industry will give them some competition. That's how we'll get a stronger economy.
Thank you, Peter. Just a follow-on question from Emma Cohen of The Age. How should government approach the challenge of COVID-19 vaccine procurement beyond your project? Do you think politicians are talking to enough other players to ensure the supply of the vaccine?
So first of all, we have been very clear that this is not a race to produce the first vaccine in the world. The world is racing to beat the virus. And if we accept that in the order of 5 billion people need to get vaccinated, one vaccine is not enough. So I think what the governments across the world should do is to see this as a global collaborative effort, where we need to have quite a few bets, because even though our vaccine is looking very good at the moment, a lot of things fall over in phase 3 human trials. But obviously for Australia, it's an incredible luxury to have Australian IP co-produced and co-developed by Australian organisations, including UQ and CSIRO, and then having an incredible research-intensive company such as CSL. CSL spends more than $1 billion per annum in R&D. It's not surprising it's Australia's largest company per capita. So I think this example here shows that we can do it. We just need to do more of it. And we've got to be prepared to change the mindset about where it's fun to invest and where you get the greatest satisfaction from investing.
Thank you, Peter. Cathy, same question to you.
Sure.
Your views?
Look, I understand that the government is spending a lot of time on this. They're working on a paper at the moment to try and identify how to go about addressing this very question. How do you actually go through and make decisions on who gets it first? How do you make decisions on if we are successful distributing it internationally? How do we be, sort of a global good citizen, as well as looking after our own citizens well? And then I guess, as Peter said, there's over 100 vaccines being developed at the moment, and they're all at various stages. I think there was, for example, one in the USA, a company called Moderna's just announced that they're doing stage 2 trials, I think, and they've shown on 45 healthy people that they're showing some early immune response. So, that sort of thing is, as Peter said, it's a long journey. It's, even though we've been fast tracking it in ways we haven't seen before, we still have to go through the rigorous process to get to that end point. And there will probably be a range of different vaccines that it develop, and some will be better than others, just in a body immune response they will evoke, assuming that we are successful and everything's looking as good as we could possibly hope at this stage, but a long way to go. And I think what we will see is probably over time, you will see a range of different vaccines developed. They'll be used because we need to get a lot out there quickly. And then eventually, just through the market, you'll find that one will be preferred over time, just because it's either better, more the delivery's better, or the effectiveness is best. It has less side effects, or whatever it is. There'll be the natural tendency of the market deciding which way. But in the meantime, when you're at that transition point, that's where government is at its best. And I know that we've been, all of us must be impressed with how our governments are going through in Australia, thinking very carefully about the steps we're taking so far. I think we should be very proud of the fact that, considering the difficulties of not really experiencing something like this before, the government has done well, that it's, compared to other countries where we're managing the situation well in keeping the numbers of COVID infected people down as much as possible. And I expect that we'll see the government do an equally good job in identifying how best to roll out any vaccine that is developed in a way that is an appropriate way, and taking into a whole range of things that they have to think about.
Prins, can I just say that the agreement that has been struck between UQ, CEPI and CSL, should the vaccine be successful, Australia's biosecurity needs have been taken into account. In other words, there will be supply. And one of the good things for the world is that you have a relatively small country by population, such as Australia, being able to produce hundreds of millions of doses. And if you were in a country with 1 billion people, you can imagine that it would take a little bit longer before it got shared with the rest of the world.
And Peter, in terms of the nano patch that you were indicating, has that been part of the discussions, I guess, in terms of the wider manufacturing process that'll be involved?
Not to my knowledge, but there are some commercial and confidence issues which my troops don't even share with me.
Understand. Just in terms of the troops, there's a question come through from Peter, and it goes: How do universities and the CSIRO adapt by aligning the incentives for staff and academics to commercialise rather than publish?
You have to change. There's an old saying: tell me how you reward your people and I'll tell you how they behave. You have to change the reward structures. And so that's what we've done at UQ. It is not enough for most people to just publish. There are some people who are so incredibly good that it would be a pity not to let them disrupt the whole world. So if we were fortunate enough to have another Einstein coming past, we probably wouldn't mind them not commercializing. But for the majority of people, you say you have to succeed across a range of activities in order to be considered for tenure and promotion. So it's about reward structures.
Thank you, Peter. And Cathy, I guess part of this, I'm sure you'd indicate, is how we pull people through that valley of death. How are you doing that in the CSIRO?
Yeah, so CSIRO, of course, is a government research agency, a national research agency. And so we are a mission-oriented organisation where we don't measure whether the number of papers you have, it's actually the impact of your research. So that's always been a major factor for us. And I guess the thing that is tricky is that sometimes the promotion processes are sometimes lag, the way government grants are given out and stuff possibly are not quite up with where we need to be. But we're seeing changes that, consequences of the impact you have, the commercialisation of research or where research is for public good, how it's being used by government policymakers to make decisions that help, have the well-being that we want in any particular area. So that's quite a difference. I guess one of the biggest pain points, is still trying to manage intellectual property for translation. And the other thing is we've got to remember peer review and publication is still a very important part of the process. You need to make sure that the science is as correct as we can say at the time. And so you just need to manage the peer review process. So you don't just rush into publication, but you might protect IP first. But I think we still haven't quite got that all sorted to a point where it's as smooth as it needs to be. And that's a great opportunity for us to be able to see what, especially as a consequence of the pandemic, is this a good time to sort of sort that out and even out some of those bumps, which does cause a bit of a friction when we're trying to translate research from, where we use it to, from where it's discovered to being used and picked up commercially.
Thank you, Cathy. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time. I'm sure we could go on for hours, and there's certainly a number of questions that have been asked that we will look to answer offline. So just in closing, I'd certainly like to thank Professor Peter Hoy and Dr. Cathy Foley. Your time in these sort of circumstances are so valuable, and we really appreciate the time you've given us this afternoon, and also in terms of the great leadership and the work that your organisations are doing to overcome this unprecedented crisis that we're right in the middle of now. I would also like to thank and acknowledge the CSIRO for their sponsorship of today's event on behalf of CEDA. On behalf of CEDA and the panel, I thank you, the audience, for your time and for participating and for all the questions and hashtags and everything else that you've sent through. Brilliant. Thank you. I'd also like to remind you that today's event has been recorded and will soon be available on the CEDA website, so you can revisit and share with your colleagues and your network. You can also connect with CEDA via LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube and Facebook, and you can stay updated on CEDA's work by visiting www.ceda.com.au. I'd like to thank you and wish you all the best for the rest of the day, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.